Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Welcome to the 7th edition of FUSO Talks, Inspiring Change. FUSO Talks, as a part of the DTA1 change strategy, is an attempt to inspire you to think out of the box. And as we have a lot of new colleagues who maybe are here for the first time, the idea is to invite speakers who come from different industries, who have nothing to do with trucks, who speak about topics that have nothing to do with our everyday business, but inspire us to think out of the box. And in that sense, I think today's topic is very, very relevant to us. Today, we're talking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. I recently read in a study that about 88% of the Fortune 500 companies that existed in 1955 are not existing today anymore. Means only 12% have managed to stay relevant for their customers, for their markets, and the rest basically died or stopped to exist. And we know that today, I mean, yeah, more than 60, 70 years is a long time, but today the rate of companies appearing and disappearing, of course, accelerates, and sometimes companies only exist for a couple of years. And I think innovation is one of the most important factors to keep a company relevant to the customers and make it successful. But then if you look into the public discussion, the discussion very often implies that innovation comes only from startups. Everyone's talking about Silicon Valley startups. It's all about tech and disruption and so on. But yeah, is that really right? I mean, entrepreneurs are like the poster boys of progress. They have become, some of them have superstar status. If you look at Elon Musk, I mean, he has followers that admire him for his bold vision and business moves. Steve Jobs has almost posthumously become a prophet. I mean, he's probably quoted in every second business presentation that you can find. So the question is, what makes these entrepreneurs so successful? How do they tick? What motivates them? And how do they get successful? And then for us, relevant as a big corporate, can we as big corporates create a culture where people can flourish, people with an entrepreneurial mindset can flourish and produce results for us? Entrepreneurship is describing exactly that approach, a people-centric approach to develop radical innovations in-house in your company and give the people, or by giving the people, the freedom to dream and to act on it. Let me get started and introduce our guest speakers. The first one is Guy Horowitz from Israel. He's an investment partner at Deutsche Telekom Capital Partners, another German company. And as a venture capitalist, he works with many entrepreneurs, and he will try to help us deciphering the DNA of an entrepreneur and understand how they tick and what we can learn from them. So welcome on stage, Guy Horowitz. Thanks for being with us. Our second guest is Mark Randall. He comes from the Silicon Valley. He is an entrepreneur for many, many years, and I might say a serial entrepreneur, having created different kinds of business. But today, he's the chief strategist and vice president of innovation at Adobe Systems, which everyone knows probably for the invention of the PDF, for Photoshop, and many other very useful softwares. Welcome on stage, Mark Randall. Well, then, without further ado, let's start the event. And Guy, allow me to start with you. You've been an entrepreneur yourself in the very beginning. So is it all rock and roll, or is entrepreneurship in the end like a managing role where at some point in time you have to start to do idea, strategy, execution, adaptation, and basically manage a company like any other else?
In a way, it's all rock and roll, but you have to remember that to play rock and roll properly, you've got to practice hours and hours. I think there's a famous quote about the Beatles. I think practice or play together for about 10,000 hours before getting to the perfect place they're at. So in that respect, I believe entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur is not necessarily a born trait or a natural gift. In some cases it is, but in many cases it's a learned and practiced type of ability and quality. So it's obviously a lot of work. You lose a lot of sleep over things that you might not consider to be important. But that's eventually what brings you to the point where you can do it without the fear of failure and without thinking that, you know, the next pitfall or the next fall is the end of your dream. We're going to talk about it today.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to that. In my speech, I also quoted a definition about entrepreneurship, and it said it's a people-centric approach for the development of radical innovations in-house, with the focus on in-house. I know that Deutsche Telekom actually runs a program called Ucubate that supports colleagues with new ideas and for the business, and is by definition basically an entrepreneurial program. Now, you work for a corporate venture capital fund, which is basically looking for innovations outside of the company. So isn't that approach kind of countering the idea of creating in-house innovation, or would you say you're kind of hedging in-house and external innovation by making sure that if one fails, you have the other in place?
Right. It's probably a mix of the two. So first, I'll address our role in Deutsche Telekom. So we're a separate entity. We're founded as a fund, as a venture fund. And for those of you who are not familiar with the structure, it means that management owns part, in our case, a majority of the shares of the management company. So that means we are actually responsible not by virtue of being employees, but actually by putting our own money alongside with our investors, Deutsche Telekom. So that kind of helps create an alignment of interest between the investors, the people who are investing, and the corporate. But that's just the financial side of it. So any corporate could use ideas coming from the outside. By the way, you mentioned some of the initiatives within Deutsche Telekom. Ucubate is an example for something that comes to serve a purpose where most people in the corporate would not necessarily have ideas, or not necessarily have ideas that are relevant for the business. So it's kind of a matching platform between people who have the urge or the desire to engage in entrepreneurship, but do not necessarily have the right platform for it, alongside ideas that are not necessarily aligned 100% with corporate strategy, but might give those employees a chance to master this capability or maybe try it. So unfortunately, that doesn't scale well. And innovation is typically relegated to, you know, parts of the organization that deal with that, and then the rest of the organization is not about innovation. And doing venturing actually allows the corporate at large, you know, including top management exposure, to high degree of innovation at the bleeding edge of technology, which typically does not really make it into the heart of the corporate. So in a way, hedging is the right way to say, or to put it. Yes, we are indeed investing in things that, if successful, will help the company thrive. And if not successful, it means that the corporate strategy has actually worked.
Well, then let's take you as a specialist on entrepreneurship, and I can't wait to hear you talking more about it. Stage is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guy Horowitz.
Thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure being here, being in Japan, and being in FUSO Talks. So in 1998, other than watching the World Cup, I was actually graduating from university, and I took my first job at a large enough Israeli company that was in the aerospace business, trying to develop UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. I was making about 5 times as much money working as a tutor for an exam called the GMAT. And actually a few of us, the person in the picture was my boss and the founder of that GMAT school, a few of us got so good at predicting what the computer is going to ask next that we decided that we might try and create a piece of software that is able to predict what computers are going to ask you. And this way we can crack the DNA of the cat. Now, not this kind of cat, that kind of cat. Cat is computer adaptive testing. Okay, so if you're able to crack that, you can actually build a software, maybe even a service, maybe even a business that offers testing as a service and preparatory testing as a service. So one of us said, as many people in the world said in 1999, hey, we have a startup here. So we've raised some money from a business angel, a rich guy. Not enough money to actually take salaries, but enough to buy some computers and start working on our venture. The first thing that I learned about entrepreneurship is that odds are you're going to fail. Guess what? Our startup was not successful either. So the holy grail for us was not necessarily nailing that computer adaptive software, that first startup. It was trying to go for the world championship, trying to be the best at what you are. It's okay to fall if you can rise. If you cannot rise, that's another problem. Entrepreneurship, just like football, starts from a tender age. But when you're a first-timer, you're not aware of the odds of failure. Or if you are aware of them, you do not pay much attention to them. If you have the skill, if you have the passion, if you have the ability, you don't care about the odds of failing. You just want to play. You want to be part of that. And this is why I really like, as an investor, to invest in first-timers. I actually like as much to invest in third-timers, veterans. Not those kinds of veterans, but I'm happy to invest in someone who's already been around. Because what is a third-timer? A third-timer is someone who's made it at least once, typically twice. But even if he's made it once and failed once, that's great, because failure is also part of the experience, of part of grooming you as an entrepreneur, as someone who aspire and achieve for better. Being passionate about what you do, having the motivation, the desire, the calling, waking up every day knowing that that's what you want to do, is the number one key to a successful entrepreneur and entrepreneurship. Thinking about your business or about your venture as part of you, something that if you stop doing will not happen, is basically what drives the greatest entrepreneurs. This is my way of thinking of the drivers, what makes entrepreneurs tick. And again, it's based on learnings that I have from meeting those hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs and asking them, what makes you tick? What keeps you up at night? What drives you in the day? The first I is invention. To invent is to come up with something that was not there before. Not everything that you invent is innovative, and not anything that's innovative is actually an invention. Inventing things from scratch is something that drives great entrepreneurs. And it's not just the ability to imagine it and make it happen, it's also the ability to start something that did not exist before, what we call inception, the genesis, that start that Guy Kawasaki is talking about. If someone has already started it, it's probably inferior from the entrepreneur's perspective to something that they had started themselves. You actually have to have influence on the life of people for your venture to be exciting and fulfilling. So many entrepreneurs say that the only reason their venture exists is because they're able to influence and inspire people, make a change for people's lives, businesses, the way they act and behave. And lastly, but definitely not the least, interest. A great entrepreneur will take interest in their venture as if it's part of their own life, of their own body. It's an organ. So having personal interest in the driver for your business is something that really bothers you, something that really makes you, excited, is really a big difference between a great entrepreneur and someone who's just doing something to be called an entrepreneur, and maybe I'm culpable of that. at least for parts of my career. I think the one difference between a great entrepreneur and anyone else is the fact that you actually have two minds. You're two people in one. You are that baby, in a sense. You're still exploring the world as if it's the first time you're seeing it. And you do sleep very well at night because you don't know any better. That's the only way you live. And there's the grown-up who's already seen a lot, has experienced a lot, has the capacity to fail and still wake up the next morning and go on about his or her idea. And guess what? Sleep very well at night. I think that's what really makes entrepreneurs who are great unique. They have those two mentalities, two personalities. They're able to have both of them at the same time and still be very, very relaxed because failure is just part of the successful journey. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Guy, for your speech, and there's a lot of food for thought and interesting things. I will, because you mentioned and you extended an invitation to Israel, I will pick one of the questions that you have posted, and that's actually, are there any historical or political drivers why Israel has become a startup country? So you've spoken about cultural differences in the world. So is it a cultural code that makes Israelis being good entrepreneurs?
There is. Maybe Israel shares some of its traits or some of its power with FUSO. Many people coming from different parts of the world badly needing to develop a common goal and a common language. The sense of urgency and the need to develop this common sense and common purpose really drove people to take risks. And taking risk is the number one, as we talked about it, number one factor in innovation. If you don't take risks, you're not going to innovate because it's always easier to rely on what you already have. Israel did not have this luxury, and to date, even 70 years later, does not enjoy this luxury. I will also mention that with the lack of resources, natural resources, Israel needed to resort to innovation to just get enough food and water and the ability to defend itself. So innovation is not just in the veins of Israelis, it's also the only way it could have existed.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think that these characteristics of entrepreneurs could also be found in a company? Because I read a study that when preparing for this, that found out that 20% of employees in big companies actually demonstrated at least some entrepreneurial activity, and it's basically kind of mining those people in your company and enabling them to deal with this. Or do you think that if you have those entrepreneurial traits, then you wouldn't fit in a company and you would go somewhere else?
Some people are born with the desire and the need to take risks and the ability to live with their risk-taking and sleep well at night, as we've talked about. You can give people some sleeping pills, as we've been discussing before, and maybe that will help them sleep better, but that's not the natural way of doing it. So some people are not comfortable with having other people's fates or livelihood on their shoulders, and that's something you cannot teach. As an entrepreneur, you actually take risks not just for yourself, but also for other people. What's probably something that an enterprise or a corporate can adopt is an environment that allows you to take risks without fearing for your job security or for your reputation, if you're worried about 360s and HR processes. So if the corporate is able to guarantee that not only you're not penalized for taking risk, but also get cookie points and maybe some financial incentives for taking those risks, you will see more and more people within the corporate innovate.
So I think that's a that's a good point to rope in Mark Randall, because Mark, you have been an entrepreneur and you're working in a big company right now. I think you're not a 1 or 2 timer. How many business did you found exactly?
3 or 3.5, depending on how you count, but yeah, 3.
All right, and how many of them were successful, and have you had a failure? Because I mean, we learned that failure is important unless you're the superstar.
Well, all of them both failed and succeeded, and it depends on how you count. But yes, I've had some spectacular failures. I've been fired as CEO by my venture capitalist. But you know, as I like to say, you know, it was a good firing, I thought. It was the right thing to do, and I actually like having an investor that is, I like to say, coin operated. So I can understand what they're going to do. They're predictable. It's much better than just getting a rich uncle, because a venture capitalist should be looking out for their investment, and because they're looking out for my investment as the largest shareholder in the company and the founder. You know, and so I was fired. I would have fired me, and it was a good firing. And so, but at the same time, that actually ended up being a big success. I was fired at one point from that company, and we ended up selling that company to Adobe. I ended up selling the company to Adobe after I had been fired as CEO, and technically was no longer involved in day-to-day operations of the company. But we were highly aligned because I was still the largest shareholder. And so, and it ended up being an incredibly successful acquisition for everybody involved. And I ended up being CEO again, you know, about 30 days before the acquisition closed, and then ended up joining Adobe.
Is there something like a good and a bad investor? And do you even have the luxury as an entrepreneur to choose the fitting investor, or is it mostly like you're so desperate to get that capital that you take all of them?
That's a good question. I encourage innovators to try to be picky, like spouses, and same thing with co-founders. Your investors and your co-founders are pretty much, you know, more important than your spouse will probably be, because divorces can be more expensive in divorcing a company if you have the wrong co-founders than divorcing a spouse. And so I think that being choosy is important, and if you don't have the option to be choosy, you might want to question whether you should be taking investment at all. Because if you have to beg for it, I think that it's just not a good path forward.
A few years back, the big thing in big corporates were the incubators or the innovation labs that were created. And for some time, that was all around and everyone was speaking about. When I look at the approach that you've taken with Kickbox, and we'll hear about it, do you think that isolating innovation works?
Generally, when I tour around companies and I get, you know, I see these innovation centers that are specially created, I just worry because a lot of times they're sort of empty of people, and the people that are there are visitors. They're not living there. And so you know, and they're always on the tour, you know, you get. But I wonder if it's you know, something that I call innovation theater, which a lot of organizations do. We put on this sort of play where we pretend to innovate and other people pretend to want us to innovate. And then you go and you have these processes and things around it. And innovation is not tidy, and it's not, you know, it's messy. That's the nature of it. And so to try to pretend that it's predictable, that you can assign it as people's job title, I think may send the wrong message. Mm-hmm. And as leadership, I think we should focus a lot on messaging to try to get the results that we want. We have to communicate the right thing to our stakeholders. And if we want employees to innovate, we're going to have to communicate clearly that we want it, and then give them a process to do it.
Well, then I think you're seeing here a company that's eager to innovate and know what the right message is. So I would ask you to tell us a little bit more about Adobe and how you approach that. Thank you, Mark Randall.
10 years ago, Adobe, I sold my third startup to Adobe and became an employee at a huge, super well-run company. And so suddenly I'm in an organization of over 12,000 people, and it was just a completely different environment. And to Adobe's credit, when they bought my startup, they said, well, you're a product guy, you invented new products, creating new industries, we want you to keep doing that here. Don't just run your products that we acquired from you. We have people that can do that. But we don't have enough people that can innovate. And you, for your entire adult life, have been making products. And so keep doing it. Go and make products. And they gave me latitude, no particular structure, no particular immediate requirements. And I then proceeded to go for 2 years, my first 2 years at Adobe, without shipping a new product. So what I did in my startups is not working in a large organization. So I'm going to need to change the playbook that I used before in order to succeed. So I went back to the drawing board and I started experimenting to figure out how could I create new businesses in the context of a large public corporation. And I slowly, very slowly, was able to sort of work my way through it and figure it out. And it required me doing everything differently than I had done before. And it started to work. And I was able to ship new businesses, Adobe's first cloud service, TV everywhere service called Adobe Pass. We got it shipping, and it became a success. It won an Emmy Award. After it started working, I got feedback from my peers in the organization, from my boss, saying, wow, what you're doing is really cool. Don't understand it. It's bizarre. And it kind of freaked me out at first, but it's working. So could you teach other people how to do that? So I had to think about how would we teach people in this organization who are not like entrepreneurs? Because if they were really like entrepreneurs, they probably wouldn't have been hired in this company, and they wouldn't have been successful and stayed inside the company, because it's two different cultures, the entrepreneurial culture and a large public corporation. So that's where this crazy thing called Kickbox came from. So Kickbox is a complete kit that will give an employee inside a large organization everything they need to come up with a new idea and convince the organization to do that new idea if it's a good idea. So Kickbox is a grassroots innovation process where we push innovation to everyone in the organization. Anyone in our organization can invent a new product line or a new business for Adobe. It could be somebody in legal. It could be somebody in janitorial. Everybody is invited to participate in this innovation process. We wanted to increase our rate of failure, and we wanted to communicate to people that we actually expected them to do it. So anyone in the organization can get a Kickbox, and they come to a workshop for 2 days where they unfortunately have to listen to me talk and try to teach them how to use these tools. And inside the box is a credit card, and it is prepaid, and it has $1,000 on it. $1,000 for them to innovate. Now, half of you, where are my engineers? Engineering people? Yeah, all right, about half the audience, that's good. People actually make the stuff that the marketing people promise. Engineers saying $1,000, that's not enough to do anything. Can't make a truck for that. And the business people are like, $1,000, you're giving everybody in your organization who has some crazy idea $1,000? That's not sustainable. That's crazy. That's too much. So is it too much or not enough? Well, the answer is both. If we were trying to build a product with it, but we're not. We're just trying to validate that we have a good idea. Can we test a value proposition? And it turns out that $1,000 is more than enough money to do that, even if it's $1 million product. So for the first $1,000, Kickbox innovators are the CEO of their own idea. Now, they may not get any more money, but the $1,000 is enough for them to get enough data to go actually get more money, which is exactly how a startup works anyway. There's a process. You open the box, it says start here. And then there are 6 color-coded levels. And they're pretty simple. It's self-guided. Anyone can do it. These 6 levels, each one is on a little card, quick reference card. No big book to read, just quick reference card. And at the end of each of the levels, there's a set of checkboxes that you check off. And so you guide your way through the process. I don't manage the innovation. I don't even know what the ideas are. Because the first year that we deployed Kickbox inside Adobe, the year before we had done about a dozen ideas, And in the first 12 months of Kickbox, we tested and prototyped over 1,000 ideas for less money than we had done the 12. So part of the magic here of a Kickbox is that we are making the failure that comes with innovation non-catastrophic. So how do these levels work? Well, let's go through this. First of all, it'll work in any type of organization, not just a software company, not just a high-tech company. It works with the existing processes. There's no change to the organization. Kickbox will even work in an organization that's never heard of Kickbox. Completely self-managed. And there's no overhead. Almost the entire budget for Kickbox is on the $1,000 credit cards. The further innovation budget, well, that comes in a minute, and I'll teach you what that does. So what happens if you beat the red box? You see, the red box is not your friend. The red box, the 6 levels, if you complete all the check boxes, and you get to level 6, and you complete those check boxes, you have conquered the red box. You stand victorious atop a crushed red box. What do you get? Fabulous prize. A blue box. What's in the blue box? No one knows. It's a secret. But I can tell you that the blue boxes are delivered by leprechauns who ride on unicorns. Yes. The interesting thing is every red box is the same. Every blue box is different. And we've given out 26 of them so far. And our most recent one was a couple weeks ago. And you get one by selling an idea, a new idea back to the organization. So people started hearing about us doing this and writing articles and saying, wow, that Kickbox is amazing. Started getting phone calls from tons of organizations saying, that can't possibly work. That's crazy. You give $1,000 to anybody that wants it. You've never heard the idea. You let anyone in the company do it, and you let them do any idea they want. That's insanity. And you don't even manage it. All of Kickbox, like 10% of my time and half my administrative assistant. That's the entire Kickbox organization at Adobe. It's run by the innovators. It's the lightest weight thing ever. And it's working. So we open sourced it. So anybody can go and download Kickbox for free. You can go here, kickbox.adobe.com, and download it for free. No strings. And you can adapt it. You can use it. You can deploy it inside your organization. And everything I know about Kickbox, everything we know about Kickbox is there on the website for you to download, use, and adapt for free. So the point is, what makes it work? Putting trust into action. By giving people some money, we've now communicated, we really expect you to do this. By trusting them for at least $1,000 to try any idea they want without review. That's putting real trust into action. And making it non-catastrophic. So if the idea blows up, we don't track the end results on purpose. Kickbox as a process is a free shot. No one will know unless you tell them. So don't tell anyone unless it works. If you get positive data, then tell people. Otherwise, it's a free shot. And that's really what makes the core of the process work. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Great talk, very interesting and funny at the same time. In a company, obviously, you have a daily job to do. So when are people doing this actually? They probably can't focus 100% on that idea. So is that something that you have to take into the weekend, or do you allow people to work in a certain
So yeah, that's a great question. So the idea of Kickbox is they get the $1,000 and they get about 30 to 40 hours of time over 6 to 8 weeks that they need to negotiate with their manager. So it's not like Google's 20% time or in some official allocation. And the reason it's fuzzy, I created it that way on purpose, because we're teaching the skills of being an internal innovator inside a large organization. And to do that, you need to have the skill of negotiating with your manager to balance between long-term crazy ideas that might have high potential payoff and the immediate deadlines and things that you have to deliver within your group. Good ideas can actually kill bad ideas in the crib. And so your idea to succeed, your kickbox concept, needs to be worthy. And you, as an innovator, need to convince other people in the organization. And that's one of the core skills that you need to gain. So you need to be a salesperson. And everybody here, all the engineers, are like, I don't want to be a salesperson, but you already are. You sold a great product to a big company yourself to get hired by FUSO, right? You are a salesperson. You sell every day. All of us do. If your idea can't look better than the basket of ideas they're already doing, it deserves to die. Okay, which is why I don't believe in creating special, coverage for innovation. When innovators should learn, your ideas have to survive in the real world and win. Mm-hmm. And to answer your earlier question about the amount of time, the 30 or 40 hours, it often ends up where they spend more time. They spend weekends, they spend, I tell them, look, you choose how you want to spend time, but they're having so much fun doing this with the possibility of doing it, knowing that it might fail, that they end up spending a lot of time. And honestly, people have told me, I spent a bunch of time on this, and even in ideas that didn't work out, it was the greatest adventure. Like, I love doing it. And I don't regret a minute of it. And some people, like even with a failed idea, there was a gentleman who was in sales who actually took his kickbox idea that ended up failing, but it was such a clever idea, and the way he validated it against customers so efficiently was so clever. He used that as his entire resume to apply for the product manager position in Creative Cloud, which is one of the most important products in our company. And he'd never been a product manager before. He's from a different field, and he got the job. I don't count those as failed projects. I count those as learning and igniting people's passion. Like, you work at this company because you're passionate about something that happens here. And if you don't, you probably should work somewhere else, right?
Thanks a lot for both the speeches. It was great and very inspiring. Just a very quick one. I was interested. So if you fail with the red box, do you get another red box? Or
yes.
Is that kind of like...
Yeah, actually, once you've gone to the workshop, that's just your first red box, and I fully expect you to fail. And I tell everybody that I fully expect them to fail. And the ones that succeed probably just got pissed off because I told them they were going to probably fail. And so I don't like to pretend that innovation is easy. It's impossibly difficult. And so the thing that ends up happening is most of our blue boxes, almost half of the blue boxes were actually people's second red box or third red box. So they try an idea, it ends up failing, and then they move on. Okay, that was a good experience. I took no for an answer, it didn't work. And then they have another idea. And sometimes they won't even be thinking about kickbox. A year later, 2 years later, unrelated, they have an idea, they see an opportunity, they see a customer problem, and they say, hey, we should fix that. And they start, if only there was a way. And they go, wait a minute, I do know a way. And so we tell them, look, we'll reactivate your credit card with another $1,000 as soon as you have an idea you can articulate. And most of our, many of our successes are now coming from those second and third tries, because innovation is like riding a bike. You're not going to be good at it the first time you do it. We want to make it non-catastrophic for you to try and fail, and then succeed.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Thank you, Guy, for your presentation. And thank you, Mark, for yours. I think a lot of ideas, a lot of food for thought, even some reading recommendations. Mark, you promised me to give me a list, so we'll share that with you if you are interested to read more about startup culture, innovating. Thanks a lot, both of you, Mark Randall, Guy Horowitz. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.